someone raised the question as to how I felt being in the service with the evacuation taking place. So I'd like to introduce my presentation here. I'll try to make it as brief as possible. Take you back to March of 1942. The place is Camp Robinson, Arkansas, which is 6 or 7 miles from Little Rock. It's in the latter part of March. It's a little cold. It's not quite summer, not cold enough to be winter. And picture, if you will, an army hut, canvas top, and rough boarded side. And imagine, if you can, a very sick soldier, sick with the flu, lying on a cot reading a letter from his sister. A letter from the state of his birth, from Salem, Oregon, his home for almost 17 years. He's thinking of the 7 years at 1- and 4-room grammar schools, 4 years at Salem High School, 4 years at Willamette University, and then the Army draft during the 2nd year in the College of Law, Willamette University. So Salem, Oregon is very, very much his home. And Oregon has been his home since birth. This is a very, very depressing letter, particularly depressing to one adjusting to a completely new regiment, barely a month away from old and familiar surroundings, and physically down with the flu. His sister's letter reads in part, "We have been visited by the Marion County Sheriff's deputies. They were very courteous, but they came with a search warrant, and they went through everything, including letters from Martha." The most shocking portion of the letter reads, "The talk is that we will be moved out of Salem. We don't know exactly where, but I'll let you know as soon as the details are made known to us." All of this seems quite unbelievable, especially to a second-year law student who is very idealistic at this point and who has firm conviction that the Constitution is inviolate. What has happened to the constitutional guarantees? Where are the champions of civil liberties? What has happened to the due process of law, without which one should not be deprived of life, liberty, or property? 250 persons whose ethnic background is Japanese are involved in the Salem community. The majority of them are native-born Oregonians. To this sick soldier on the Army cot, the situation is more than an academic, constitutional, legal, philosophic question. More pragmatically, it has to do with the very, very deep personal, emotional matter of home. To those who know the humbleness of that home, the soldier's concern may very well be a laughable one, but to the soldier reading a letter from his sister, the thought of losing his address is a profoundly despairing one. Even when the foundation is rendered unstable by hungry termites, home is still home. With its leaking roof, water hand-carried from a spring up a hill 100 yards, outdoor toilet facilities, home is still home. A single naked light bulb in the middle of a bare floored room, and wood-burning stoves for heating and cooking requiring daily replenishment of the wood box. It all adds up to a very, very dear place called home. In no other place can this soldier find identity with the love and support of this home and the friends of the community from which he comes. He feels the chilling impact of what he read in A Man Without a Country. This feeling of complete void is akin to no other experience in this young man's life. His concern includes his father, mother, and sister. Father was born July 20, 1879 in Fukuoka, Japan. He's the second son of a farm family. Education, elementary school in Japan. Arrived in this country April 8, 1900. Port of entry, Portland, Oregon. Occupations, railroad worker, sawmill and fuel yard operator, presently a farmer. Continuous resident of Oregon since his arrival in these United States. Known among his peers for his integrity, his moral and physical courage, believes firmly in the right of every individual to fair treatment and respect. Mother was born February 15, 1880, Fukuoka, Japan. Arrived in Tacoma, Washington, April 27, 1907. She was a picture bride. No formal education, but well versed in matters pertaining to the family, very much a stickler for proper etiquette, respect, honesty, consideration for others, fiercely independent, will not back down from any challenge. Economic status, lower middle income. I would say barely. Simple people, but I knew them to be very good people. They were excluded from naturalization because of their Asiatic origin. They had neither visited Japan in these intervening years, nor even kept in touch with the family. Sister is 19 years old, sophomore at Willamette, honor student, active church member, well accepted in the community. Now these profiles seem to provide no basis for any need for removal from an area as non-strategic as Salem, Oregon. It is difficult for the young American soldier to puzzle out this moment of contradictions. Here is a nation that has committed itself to the preservation of the democratic way of life and is herself now eroding the civil rights of a segment of her citizenry. It is a moment in the history of these United States when peace and justice are truly deferred. He is to learn later, this recruit, that the Alien Enemy Act of 1798 permits the summary apprehension and internment of nationals of states at war with the United States. But the question is, what about citizens, U.S. citizens? Are persons born in these United States and vested with all the rights guaranteed under the Constitution, protected from apprehension, internment, and concentration. It is proven in the course of events that under the blanket of national security, the President can issue an executive order empowering the military to declare designated areas militarily off limits and remove therefrom individuals arbitrarily labeled possible security risks. No evidence of disloyalty nor any legal process is necessary. The Camp Robinson recruit completed basic training and learned he was not eligible for assignment to a fighting division. He was assigned to a headquarters detachment of a station complement unit, a post-maintenance unit at Camp Crowder, Missouri, and eventually became a sergeant major of that segregated unit. Now, life in a station complement unit is totally devoid of glamour unless washing pots and pans, cleaning latrines, interpreting blueprints in the post engineer's office, hustling freight, tending lawns and gardens, waxing guest house floors, maintaining vehicles at the motor pool, testing blood samples at the post hospital can be classified as glamorous. Camp Crowder was a typical station complement unit manned by soldiers regarded as unfit for duty with fighting units and those awaiting assignment with an appropriate unit. The Nisei soldiers there were of varied backgrounds in terms of occupational background, educational training, origin of their parents. Likewise, their approach to Army life varied from positive to indifferent to negative. The social background varied from typical ethnic Nisei to atypical, non-ethnic Nisei, from Kibei to mixed parentage, devoid of any previous contact with other Niseis. The attitudes, therefore, varied accordingly from all-out gung-ho to out-and-out rebellious and hostile. Economic background is varied as well. Observance of social amenities ranged from refined to crude. The mood range ran from cooperative to outright resistant. In this volatile environment, life moved surprisingly peaceful. Troublemakers were transferred as opportunities arose, but I must mention one emotional incident as a passing reference. An incident involving a Nisei from Washington whose mother was in a tuberculosis sanitarium, therefore was not evacuated. On Thanksgiving Day, 1942, that soldier received a wire advising him that his mother had only a few days to live. He requested a furlough, but was refused because the sanitarium was in the Western Military Command, off limits to all peoples of Japanese ancestry. That soldier, completely traumatized, threatened to go there anyway, absent without leave if necessary. And the company, the commandant of Camp Crowder called me late one Sunday afternoon and asked me to accompany him and the first sergeant to talk with this highly distraught soldier. I recall that it took 2 hours of persuasion to keep that soldier on an even keel. And fortunately, he did not go AWOL and was transferred in the fall of 1943 to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, as a part of the cadre for the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And he was given a battlefield commission and stayed in the Army and was discharged, I believe, well, not discharged, he retired as a lieutenant colonel, made Army the career. Mention must be made of an incident at Fort Riley, Kansas, where soldiers were locked in the motor pool garage when President Roosevelt visited that particular station. The station complement units in the main supplied the cadre for the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion, the 232nd Combat Engineer Company, and the 206th Army Band. Those who were not initially transferred to Shelby were ordered to Fort McClellan, Alabama, and Camp Landing, Florida for refresher combat training as replacement personnel for the dead and wounded of the 442nd. And since I was the Sergeant Major at Camp Crowder, I was given the privilege of listing for transfer to Camp Shelby some of the cadre members. And naturally, since Martha was with me, my name did not appear on the list as an initial cadre member. So I was one of the replacement people that went to Camp McClellan, Alabama for training for overseas replacement. The foot soldiers of the 442nd came as volunteers from the concentration camps of the continental United States and volunteers from the territory of Hawaii. It is an historical fact that the pre-combat relationships of the two groups was not amicable. In fact, it was downright hostile to the point of physical confrontation. We in the of the mainland were given the name Kotonks, which is a Japanese term for the sound of something hitting the ground. It labeled us as hardheads. And they, in turn, labeled themselves as Buddha heads. Now, some play with that in a sort of a punish way. Buddha, if it's pronounced differently, like Buddha, means pig head. So people play around with that. But nevertheless, there was this hostile relationship between the two.
That's between the Hawaiian
Niseis and the mainland Niseis. you must take into account the fact that the Hawaiians were, first of all, in larger numbers in Hawaii, therefore probably acted very much like a member of the majority in their environment. Also, there were many people in Hawaii from the Okinawas. They are of a different breed, and in fact were subject to discrimination by the normal Japanese society. So I would suspect that some of them were venting their feelings against the mainland Niseis. But all of that, of course, the broken arms, the broken noses. I knew of one person that was thrown out of the second floor of a barracks because he was trying to oppose these gangs and so forth. But I must tell you that combat changed all that. Going back for a moment to those who remained in station complement units after large numbers were transferred as cadre, the remainder in the main were sent in the spring of 1944 to Fort McClellan, Alabama, to the Infantry Replacement Training Center to be trained as replacements for the casualties of the 442nd. Now this is a tale worth telling because of the rebellion that occurred. A dissident faction comprised of some Kibes. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that term.
Yeah, I've been telling them that. They know the name.
Some of these Kibes and others refused to go overseas, basing their refusal on ill treatment during their army service and incarceration of their parents and relatives. In other cases, it was for moral, religious reasons, reinforced by the injustices of the evacuation. It should be noted that just as the people that signed no in the concentration camps in response to a questionnaire, those dissidents in the Army were given an uncomplimentary label by those scheduled to go overseas. The true motives of these dissidents remain undefined, but it was noted by some that at least a part of the Kibes came back to the U.S. to avoid the Japanese draft. But it also should be noted with equal emphasis that a far larger number of these Kibes did go into the field of battle and made a record for themselves and for their units. The dissidents who stayed here spent their days in military labor battalions. The feelings against this group, as well as the no-nos, appear to remain with the combat veterans in some communities. And those people are, to this day, ostracized. Now to get a flavor of life in a combat zone in a foreign country, impacted by a devastating war as experienced by individuals, now unencumbered by the restraints of a more normal society. Picture, if you will, a pup tent pitched under one of the trees in an apple orchard, and a long line of soldiers waiting to participate in some activity transpiring within the confines of that small tent. A naive inquiry brings you to the realization that sex is a part of many soldiers' recreation. In an environment far from home, inhibitions do not interfere to the same degree as at home. Sex is bought and sold quite easily, along with food and other things. The other basic commercial commodity, bought and sold, even in the confines of a pup tent. One realizes that war is a deadly game of survival. It's devoid of the finely structured niceties of the normal society. It is a game of kill in order not to be killed. All the elements of his training come into focus for the soldier, as he mentally prepares himself for commitment to a battle assignment. In spite of this, the actual baptism of fire is nothing like any training exercise ever devised. Combine the terror of rifle bullets slicing through the air, the shrill whistle, and the sound of an incoming mortar shell, the freight train sound of artillery shells, and add to that the hazard of landmines underfoot. You have just some of the elements of a battle engagement. It's tough physically, it's devastating emotionally, it's depressing mentally. Can one witness a person's finest hour in this oppressive environment? The answer to me is, I don't think so. I don't think that a man's finest hour can be found under combat situations. The 100th Infantry Battalion and the 442nd Regimental Combat Team were involved in 7 major European campaigns from September 1943 to May 8, 1945. They were the Naples-Foggia campaign. This was the 100th Battalion only. Someone was asking about the difference between the two. Rome-Arno was a combined regimental campaign. Southern France, anti-tank only. Northern Apennines, and then the Rhineland, Central Europe, and Po Valley. But I believe the Po Valley was also not a full regimental commitment. Out of these encounters, the 442nd earned 7 presidential citations, 9,486 Purple Hearts, 18,143 individual decorations, including 1 Congressional Medal of Honor and 52 Distinguished Service Medals. Did these represent some of the finest moments? It is difficult to assess because one can remember all too vividly the days in a water-filled foxhole with temperature in the 50s, no hot food for 2 weeks, no space to stretch out, and the other days on a rocky hillside in a foxhole dug around a huge rock with the hot Italian sun beating on a steel helmet, and those times when the ranks were decimated, friends blown away or injured. In this person's mind, it all adds up to nothing but unadulterated hell. Then why the volunteers from the concentration camps, from Hawaii, and all these evidences of deep commitment, even sacrifice of life and limb? For the mainland, they say, it was tied to their hopes for restoration of what they had before the war, as little as that may have been. For some, it meant a certain level of economic security. For others, social and professional prestige among their kind. For still others, just the state of being a member of a society, however restrictive. For the Hawaiian, they say, those politically, sociologically, and economically more mature, all members of a significant ethnic factor, the aspirations were greater, the hopes much higher. Their dreams were for Hawaiian statehood, congressional seats, greater representation in the local and territorial government, and recognition as a respectable component of Hawaiian society. However, let it be quickly said that these nobler thoughts came not in the heat of battle, but as afterthoughts in the rear areas after the battles had been fought. When the rifle bullets are zinging overhead and the mortar shells are exploding all around, one's preoccupation is with survival, believe me. Yes, survival. Not necessarily the singular survival of self, but self together with the community of soldiers, particularly one's own unit. Now, I have expressed this to the smaller group. I believe it was this sense of community that transformed 2 hostile factions, the Hawaiian Niseis and the mainland Niseis, into a unified whole and enabled them to perform as a regimental combat team. And I say that all the rest was incidental. Now, what impact did the performance of the 442nd have in terms of business and political opportunities for Niseis in particular? Certainly in Hawaii, corporate positions were promised even before the war was ended. Politically, opportunities to fill both appointed and elected positions became more available for Niseis and Sanseis. And of course, statehood was granted to the territory of Hawaii. An assessment of the impact on the mainland is not as easily definable. To begin with, the large segment of Niseis came of age during the war. They were dispersed from West Coast ghettos and in many cases found a wider business horizon. Those who found employment soon established a reputation that inured to the benefit of all Niseis. The veterans probably came back with a greater sense of confidence and responsibility in their future. The GI Bill enabled many to continue their education. There were, of course, veteran preference provisions in federal and many state job hiring procedures which enabled Nisei applicants to obtain some advantage along with all other veterans. In all probability, some business doors were opened because of the 442nd, but I say the bottom line was the performance that was given by individual Niseis as they got into their job. Now, just to conclude these remarks, I must tell you that 40 years ago, that Camp Robinson recruit, confronted with the devastating news of the evacuation of his family and the reality of segregation within the Army, resolved, first, that he would work within the confines of that Army and achieve as much rank as was possible to gain in a management status. And second, recognizing the delicate nature of our democratic processes, he resolved to protect and preserve the right of every individual to live, to work, and to play in peace with reasonable assurance of just treatment. He has held to this resolve through the years in his military service, in his community service, in his work within the church, and in his business activities.
Thank you, Tom.
They appeared to be open-minded enough that they would accept the establishment of a military intelligence school here. And I have read subsequently, for instance, the black people, some have said that Minnesota is a receptive area. I don't know how true this is, but I have heard it said that. But certainly, for us, it's a very fine community. 20 some odd years ago, when the company had me up here for a year, I did hear that Edina had some reluctance in accepting Nisei home buyers, but it certainly doesn't exist there now, and if it did, I certainly would speak my part as a member of the Edina Human Rights Commission. I don't think it exists. Hope not. If it does, why, I would like to hear about it, and I would fight it to the end. Any discrimination, whether it be race, religion, or whatever.
I have a question, Tom. Was the former Senator Humphrey for, against relocation? Someone recently told me he was for relocation, and I couldn't imagine, unless he was a very young man in 42.
He was mayor of Minneapolis about.
He was mayor in 46.
So, and he was one of the first ones to have the human rights commission.
I have not.
Yeah,
I've not
no, this would
explored
be in
that.
42, Ty.
Yeah.
Before he became mayor. I need to do some research on
Yes,
that.
I'm not.
So I didn't disagree with the person who said it. I said I'll just have to check this out because people differ. Pebble? You're not bringing up the
No, it's so.
Yeah, she coughs periodically.
No, I don't know what Senator Humphrey's position was on that. But one thing that I used to think about a lot, as a second year law school student, and one who thought he knew the U.S. Constitution and its strength, and that it was you had this Constitution and it would protect you all the way through. I remember what my father used to say, and he had 6 years of education, which was equivalent to a grammar school education, U.S. He had it in Japan. He used to say to me, and we used to argue quite vigorously on this, he said the Constitution is a man-made document. It's interpreted by, it's subject to human interpretation, and he said it will be interpreted according to the tenor of the times. And when the evacuation occurred, I realized that my 2 years of my college degree and 2 years of law was looking at the whole thing too idealistically. And the reality of the thing is that it's a democracy is a government of peoples, and takes every one of us to keep that Constitution strong. We'll shake, and it'll rattle, and it will crack, but it's still there as, I think, one of the strongest documents in the world protecting the individual. It may go against you for a period of time, but if you fight hard enough and long enough, it will bring you back.
When you were speaking of the president's authority and the executive order, my thought went to a recent incident where the president had the authority of keeping the media out of Grenada, which is another crack in the
Infringement.
how that
Censorship.
can, how you slide into that kind of thing.
I come out of Baptist roots, so I'm really ecumenical.